Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, an anonymous pro-Israel group and web database, Canary Mission.
They've seen this opportunity to not just have people be shamed and excluded, but to actually have the hammer of the state brought down on them.
It's been blacklisting pro-Palestinian students and professors. Now the Trump administration is using it to silence and potentially deport them. I'm Manuel Rápalo, and this is The Take.
My name is Darryl, and I teach anthropology and law at the University of Chicago.
First of all, I should say that you yourself are on the Canary Mission's so-called blacklist. I know that it's anonymous and it's somewhat obscure, but do we have any sense of who is behind Canary Mission?
In short, no. We have no idea who is behind this website. It seems to have popped out of nowhere in 2014, and it sort of represents an attempt to build not just a blacklist, but almost like a comprehensive online directory for people operating on campuses in the United States who the Zionist movement deems to be enemies.
Canary Mission's simple interface allows you to easily explore profiles of radical individuals and organizations. BDS News will keep you up to date with the latest developments, and follow our blog for an in-depth analysis of radical campus activity.
Now, some of the people on the website are well-known activists who are also students and professors and workers at universities. Other people have very limited or incidental connections to Palestine activism. Maybe they just signed a petition once or did something to support their students who they thought were being unfairly treated. So this is a very, very wide-ranging sort of operation, and as far as we can tell, completely untraceable. But it's quite astounding that after being in operation for over a decade, we still don't really know who's behind Canary Mission. Investigative journalists have spent months, if not years, digging into it. They've found a few donors here and there, a few clues as to where the website might be hosted, but no concrete information about who's directing the operation.
And like you mentioned, Darryl, this organization has been around for quite some time. But what we are learning is that last week, a senior Homeland Security official for the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Agency, or ICE, Peter Hatch, testified in federal court in a major lawsuit that was brought on by academic associations against the Trump administration. Hatch testified that his department relied on the Canary Mission's blacklist for some 5,000 names, specifically to identify foreign academics to be investigated even for possible deportation. That is itself the big news here, because this is the first official piece of evidence, proof of the influence that this organization is having on the U.S. federal government. Hatch said that more than 75% of the names his agency was given came from this list, came from Canary Mission. So I guess the question here is, given what we're learning now, how big of a deal is this?
Oh, this is a very big deal. It's news that is outrageous and horrifying, but yet also at a very deep level, unsurprising. What Hatch's testimony does is it not only confirms that the government was relying on a particular website, as problematic as that might be, it's really a sign of a full circle moment between all sorts of different kinds of non-state right-wing movements that are trying to repress any organizing on behalf of Palestinian liberation. It's a convergence between that right-wing scene and the right-wing forces that are inside the state, that are now running the bureaucracies of Homeland Security and ICE. And of course, after the recent Trump budget was passed, ICE is now set to be dramatically expanded in its budget and in its operational scope. It's going to have a detention budget, which will rival that of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. It will have more personnel than the FBI. All of this is an attempt to meet the goals of the Trump administration to radically scale up deportations. And frankly, it's a form of ethnic cleansing if we think about the long-term future of the polity in the United States.
We reached out to Canary Mission for comment, but have not heard back. According to NBC, Canary Mission said in an email that it has not been working with the Department of Homeland Security and pointed out that its database is public and that, quote, "we have had no contact with this administration or the previous administration," end quote. Darryl, I feel like there's so much to unpack now, but one of Canary Mission's videos, this was posted 10 years ago, described U.S. campuses as hotbeds for anti-Israel, Jew-hating, and even anti-American extremism.
Combat this wave of hatred, protect freedom, and make campus life safe for everyone. It is your duty to ensure that today's radicals are not tomorrow's employees.
Now, for someone who has been on this list, that this is something that you have personal experience in, what is the impact that a person's life has after being put on this list?
So the impact before the recent turn with the Trump administration and before Canary Mission was essentially feeding names into the deportation machine, before that happened, the primary effect of Canary Mission was to spread terror. Now, many people who are listed on the website may not experience direct consequences. So myself, I was listed on the website. It was the fall of my first full year teaching on campus at a new institution in a new job. And the first weekend of the school year, as students and their parents were moving into dorms, there were posters that suddenly appeared all around kiosks on campus that had a cartoon likeness of my face and the face of another professor. And the poster kind of in large font, large letters, accused us of being supporters of terrorism.
Wait,
and
these were physical posters that had been put up on campus?
Physical posters that appeared overnight on campus. I got a text from a student that I knew with a photo of one of these posters saying, "Hey, have you seen these? Are you aware of these?" And the poster also had the names of, I think, 10 students or recent graduates, calling us all supporters of terrorism at the University of Chicago. Now, I want to be clear. Canary Mission did not make this poster. But at the time, this professor and myself were the only faculty at our institution who were on the Canary Mission website. Now, the poster was created by the David Horowitz Freedom Center, which is a separate right-wing organization that has been doing sort of right-wing campus culture war stuff for a very long time, since the 1990s. Now, in my own particular case, it was not pleasant to be featured in that way. But at the end of the day, the consequences for me were pretty minimal. I mean, all credit to my employers. They didn't really care about this poster and these allegations. They sort of, blew it off as they should have. But for students who are named on the Canary Mission website, the idea is to basically target them with Google smears, right? So if a potential employer or a potential, someone they might be seeing kind of socially, romantically, Googles them, right? The top result or one of the top results is going to be some kind of, really negative, possibly defamatory information, accusing them of being supporters of terrorism, anti-Semites, and so on and so forth.
Before we get into that impact, do you know what it might have been that got you on Canary Mission's radar in the first place?
No, but I've been involved in research and advocacy and organizing around Palestine for about 25 years, and so at the time I appeared on the site, maybe 15 years. So it was not something that surprised me. Canary Mission is only part of this much longer history of the Zionist movement trying to destroy people's sort of career and social prospects through blacklisting them. So before Canary Mission, there was a website called Campus Watch, which emerged, I think, around the time of 9/11, which again was about targeting by name academics who were deemed to be supporters of terrorism or Islamic fundamentalism, all of the sort of scary buzzwords. Before Campus Watch, of course, there was a long history of the Anti-Defamation League hiring private intelligence agents to spy on labor organizers, anti-apartheid activists, Palestinian rights and Palestinian liberation sort of movement folks. This private espionage operation actually led to the FBI raiding the ADL at some point in the early 1990s.
And the tactic that Canary Mission is using here, at the very least, the assumption is that any sort of pro-Palestinian demonstration is inherently anti-Semitic. And so any sort of activism is an act of, quote, terrorism or in support of Hamas. And by the way, you can read this in the White House fact sheet that states this specifically. So they're trying to create this link between two very different concepts, being pro-Palestine and being anti-Semitic. It's a sort of false equivalency. But it does remind me, and I think you're hinting at this already, of a long history in this country of political persecution. There was the Red Scare. There was the Japanese internment camps during World War II. There was COINTELPRO when the FBI was looking into individuals who were participating in the U.S. civil rights movement and the anti-war movement of the 1960s and 70s. And in each one of those cases, you can point to instances where individuals were worried about losing their jobs, potentially facing deportation.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think the Zionist movement is unique. This is just a way that right-wing forces and reactionary forces wage war at the social level, right? So now it's the government directly getting involved in repressing Palestine activism in ways that they have not done in the past. Now, of course, the government does have a long history of repressing Palestine activism. I don't want to give the impression that, things were fine until now and it's only with Trump, blah, blah, blah. But this is a qualitative change. This is a radical scaling up to take names from a website, an anonymous website, 5,000 or so names, and to essentially feed them straight into the deportation machine. That's not something that we saw prior. So that was affecting people's ability to travel to Palestine and to cross through Israeli-controlled airports and border crossings. And of course, for Palestinian Americans, in particular diasporic Palestinians who want to be able to return home and see relatives and so on, that is extremely concerning. So even in those cases, Canary Mission data was being relied on by the state to exclude people, but not necessarily in a super systematic way. But what's different about this particular case is we have a confirmation from the highest levels of the security apparatus that they were wholesale taking names from Canary Mission and using them essentially as the default database for a massive immigration enforcement effort.
More with Darryl after the break. So, Darryl, let's go back to recent cases. The website lists students and professors that are sort of recommended for deportation. Among them, Mahmoud Khalil, a former Columbia student who had been detained and then released on bail for leading student protests on campus. There's also the case of Rumeysa Ozturk from Tufts in Boston, who was grabbed off the street by masked agents, also released on bail. Can you tell us more about these more prominent cases and exactly what it was that they were accused of?
What's so terrifying about this particular deportation wave is how ordinary most of these folks were, right? So Mahmoud Khalil, yes, he is a prominent face in the sort of campus movement. But some of these other folks, like Rumeysa Ozturk, for example, they were really engaged in very ordinary, relatively low-profile forms of activism. So that is the part that's really, really terrifying, right? I mean, it's bad enough and outrageous enough that the leaders and the symbols of these movements are being targeted. But the idea here was that they went after both prominent people as well as not prominent people, and that I think really contributes to the sort of the object of spreading fear and terror throughout the movement, right? It really sends a signal to people like, you should not touch this issue with a 10-foot pole, right? It's not just don't become a leader who gets up in front of the news conferences, right? It's like, don't even sign a petition. Don't even think about signing a petition, right? Like, that's the signal that this type of detention strategy is really trying to send.
And it's trying to send this signal specifically to the academic world. What is it about academia? What's the strategy there and the messaging?
Well, I mean, the impacts are already quite clear because Columbia University is actively collaborating with the Trump agenda. Harvard, they've sued the Trump administration, but they're also negotiating with them behind closed doors. So I would not be surprised if they also ended up cutting a deal. But what they want is to turn the universities from a safety valve where some alternative ideas can be expressed, but in ways that are not threatening, to places where actually, the ideological consensus of the right is actively reproduced and enforced. So for them, Palestine and the weaponization of anti-Semitism is just the easiest way to get their foot into the door. Their other priorities are around dismantling DEI, affirmative action. They want to turn universities into a place that actively and vocally uphold white supremacist notions of American society. So before, there was that kind of liberal commitment to trying to produce like a multiracial and multicultural ruling class, so to diversify the boardroom. And universities saw their mission as kind of producing a pipeline for that vision of society. And as problematic and as limited as that vision was, it's one that's seen as a threat to the right in its current iteration. And that's what they're trying to shut down.
Does it scare you as an academic, as someone who's been on this list? Is this something that keeps you up at night? And I ask because Canary Mission is apparently, it seems to be escalating. It's not just calling for individuals to be publicly shamed and prevented from being employed. It's actively calling on the state to deport them.
Yeah, I think Canary Mission is probably succeeding beyond their wildest dreams, because for a long time, you're right, their call was basically for shaming and excluding people. And it seems like in the post-October 7th world, that they've seen this opportunity to not just have people be shamed and excluded, but to actually have the hammer of the state brought down on them. And that's made them more emboldened in calling for deportations and arrests. They've never been sticklers for detail or for factual accuracy. So I remember during the Columbia encampments, they called for the deportation of a very, very well-respected professor at Columbia, who is not only a U.S. citizen who was born in the United States, but actually one of the leading indigenous scholars in my field. So, they're going out here, not only calling for people to be deported in general, but calling for the deportation of Native indigenous Americans, right? I mean, to me, that is really just like the peak of settler and right-wing sort of arrogance, honestly.
So, Darryl, what happens if they want to get off of this list? And I believe the term that they use there is how to become an ex-canary.
Well, it's a private actor, it's shadowy, and they have appointed themselves as judge, jury, and executioner, which means you can't appeal to anyone except them. And I believe that they have a part of their website that says that if you contact them and if you write an apology essay recanting your views, they'll consider taking down your page or maybe updating it in some way. I mean, frankly,
they want a public apology.
They want a public humiliation is what it sounds like. I don't know of many people who have taken them up on this offer. I wouldn't expect most people would.
Darryl, one thing that I am curious about, with the current landscape of digital surveillance with advanced technology like facial recognition and AI and big data, how does this current targeting of pro-Palestine voices compare to those other historical campaigns of political repression in the United States? What feels different about that now in the age of social media?
Well, it's digital surveillance, but it's also digital self-making, right? Everyone is expected to present themselves to the world through digital media, right? Whether you do it in a sort of public way by being an influencer, or even if you're just a private individual who has a locked Instagram account that's followed by 50 of your friends. At the end of the day, you exist in the world, you exist in society through digital media, and all of those ways in which you're plugged into the system also become a means of surveillance, whether it's done through a corporation or done through a government, or in most cases through a convergence between corporate and government power. That is something that, everyone has to be extra aware of, obviously, because this is unfortunately part of the reality that we live in. I don't think surveillance and repression are anything new, but of course, the means of surveillance and the means of repression are constantly evolving and being updated, and that requires anyone who wants to push back, or frankly, even to survive, to also update and hopefully, leapfrog the advances that are coming in terms of the repression.
Darryl, thank you so much for joining us today on The Take.
Thank you.
And that's The Take. We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions about today's episode. And what stories do you want to see next on the show? Let us know in the comments below what you'd like us to cover. Let's keep the conversation going. and I'll see you tomorrow.